I would like to welcome you to the program. What is special about tonight is that I am re-releasing our season 2 series onto YouTube over the next coming months. At the moment, it's only been available in the Facebook group, and you've had to scroll way down to find it. But it's now going to be on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and a few other places. And it was a landmark series, and it focused on Des Ford and Glacier View. And in a moment, what I'm going to do is simply play the entire season 2, episode 1 with Dr. William G. Johnsson. And I'll just back off. It's not a reaction video. It's simply a way to place this series onto YouTube and Facebook at the same time so you can comment on it as well. I may try and bring some of the comments up during the program. I won't comment on them, but I'll bring them up onto the screen. So if you're watching live and you'd like to have your say, please do so in the comments. And while we're just waiting for people to come, I thought I would just share just a brief memory of how this whole season began. And by the way, season 2 had 86 episodes, and slowly they'll be making their way up onto YouTube and in this new special re-release format. So so about 3 years ago, when the first lockdown was had just hit, I believe, and I may get this a little bit wrong, but I was wrapping up SDAQ&A podcast. It had been a podcast for a while. I'd been kind of speaking. I'd been doing interviews every now and again. They were short interviews, 45 minutes to 1 hour, and they're all still up there. Season 1 is only available on podcast. You can find it right now. I think I've got a link in the description below. And you can, and there were about 27 interviews, I think, in season 1. I literally I'd left the church already, and I was thinking, maybe it's time for me just to not be involved, even though I was super interested in all things Adventist. So anyway, as I was wrapping it up, I got a message from a young man, and I'm just going to read it out who he is. It's Lance Cameron Christopher Eggy, and hopefully he's watching tonight. They're in the Philippines, and at the time he was studying to be a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and currently he wrote to me tonight, and he is currently a Bible teacher at a local Adventist academy, and he's looking after about 300 students, and his subject is Daniel and Revelation, and he's going to be soon commencing his master's degree. But anyway, Lance contacted me via email and said, look, I've just listened to season 1, episode 1, 2, and 3 on your podcast where you interviewed Dr. Desmond Ford. How about you interview Dr. William G. Johnsson and get his view on Glacier View and Des Ford and that kind of thing? And I said, Lance, it looks like I'm kind of wrapping up my involvement with SDA Q&A, and I wouldn't even know how to begin to get in touch with Bill Johnsson. So anyway, I kind of forgot about it, and Lance can correct me, but in my memory, it was a few weeks later, and lockdown was now in full swing. Isolation. We were all at home, and this is where I was kind of doing some other podcasts and things. And I got an email from Lance saying, hey, I've organized an interview with you and Bill Johnsson next Thursday, whatever time. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, I'd better go ahead and do it. So I worked out, and you'll see in the clip, you'll see I had on the board back there some letters that I'd bought from a thrifty gift shop or something, a $2 shop, and they don't even match properly. And I was using a microphone that you use for live gigs, and I was way back from it. And anyway, there's lots of issues with it's a little bit not such sharp vision, but the audio is pretty good. But anyway, um, I got a few things together, and I worked out how to connect Zoom to Facebook, and I reopened the SDAQ&A group. We had a couple of hundred members there, and I mentioned that I was going to be doing that interview, and then I noticed over the next week people joining the group, and then I noticed when I began the interview, and I was very nervous, people were joining. And by the end of the interview, we had about 600 new members. And by the end of the week, we had about 1,200 members. And so I thought, well, this might be something fun and interesting to do during lockdown. And so I continued doing SDAQ&A. And the next week we interviewed Dr. John Godfrey and chatted about Glacier View. And the next week I interviewed Dr. Norm Young and chatted about Glacier View. And then someone said, hey, why don't you try and get Gillian Ford on? Why don't you try and do a short series on Glacier View? So one thing led to another. I got in touch with Gillian, and she put me in touch with so many other people. Lance connected me also with other people. And it was just kind of a bit of a snowball effect. Away we went. And what was, you even hear me in this interview say that we're going to do this season on Glacier View for about 6 episodes throughout May or something like that. And it literally went for ages. We did 86 interviews altogether. And they are fascinating, but largely they haven't seen the light of day outside of Facebook. And so they are now going to make their way onto YouTube and kind of reviving themselves on Facebook as well, because you can comment live now on both platforms. And we've got a little bit more technology that we can use to our advantage. So I'm only kind of chatting a little bit to give you some background and to allow people to join in. It's very late in America. Here it's about 10:37 p.m. on a Thursday night. In America, it must be like, I think, 9:30 p.m. Wednesday night. In the UK, who knows what time it is. But hopefully people will watch live tonight, but also over the next however long these things remain on these platforms. So again, please comment, like, subscribe. But if you are watching live, I will try and bring up your comments over the screen as well. Not sure how visual they'll be. So anyway, welcome to SDAQ&A special, this special release of a series that was going to be very short, that changed my life. It kind of started a whole new thing for me that I've loved, enjoyed. It's not something I'm trying to do to tear down the church in any way. I've left the church, but I've got an inquiring mind. I love the idea of exploring truth claims. And if you have a truth claim, I don't think you should have any fear whatsoever of having that claim scrutinized and challenged and looked at, because that's what keeps it fresh and alive for the next generation. And it also hones your own skills, if you're an apologist of Adventism, to ensure that you can defend it. Because there are people out there that may ask you hard questions. So don't fear the hard questions. And pretty much that's what the whole of SDAQ&A is, a former Adventist looking in from the outside and really enjoying it. And I hope that there's many years to come. So, so I think we're coming up to at least 200 interviews. We're into season 6 now. And it all started with that conversation with Lance. And I appreciate that. And thank you if you're watching, Lance. And it really kicked off from there. And that's why I want this season 2 to be made available to the world. I think there's so many interesting things. And this topic is still something that people really talk about. This week already, what date is it today for future generations watching? It's the 27th of August, 2023. Last week in The Record, the Adventist weekly magazine, there was an article on Glacier View that came out, and it was quite inaccurate. So in a couple of days, Wednesday this week, we're going to be doing an interview with a couple of people, hopefully Gillian and a couple of others, where we're going to look at that article and correct the inaccuracies. And people say, well, why do you keep talking about it? Des Ford, Glacier View. Come on, it's an interesting topic because it's never been resolved. A lot of the players, a lot of the people that were involved, or a lot of the people that were the next generations on from being involved, just don't want to talk about it. It's just never been healed. You can't really move on from a topic until there is healing. So hopefully this series, as people start to watch it again, it will help lead to discussion and healing. Okay, so I think we're about to give it a go. There are some comments coming through. Let's just see if there's anything. I've got to bring it up on my screen here. Excuse me a second. Oh, Gillian is watching. She says, hi, Pete. I stayed up at your request. You can drift off to sleep if you like, Gillian. And we've got Connie French has written, replying. It talks about God's judgment, not ours. God was judged when Jesus died on the cross. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so keep comments coming if you're watching, and let's see if I can work out all these buttons here, which I love doing, and let's see how we go. So yeah, sit back and enjoy Season 2, Episode 1 of 86, Des Ford, Glacier View, 40th Anniversary Retrospective, and my fascinating interview and conversation with Dr. William G. Johnsson. There's a little mention there of those that sponsored the first episode. Thank you so much, you guys. Enjoy. So yeah, thank you. How convinced are you that something special and supernatural and unique happened on October 22, 1844?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that question.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm Peter Dixon, and we've got a very special Q&A today. In fact, the whole of May, we're reflecting on the 40th anniversary of Glacier View. Now, when I've mentioned that to some people, they've said, what is that? And others have said, oh, I'm fascinated. So today is going to be just a look at that event, some of the ramifications of the event, what led up to it, and I'm joined today by Dr. William Johnsson. Welcome to the program.
Most welcome indeed.
And you're okay if I call you Bill? I think we...
Oh yeah, sure.
And
Yeah.
And you weren't born a Seventh Adventist. I
No,
remember
no,
hearing...
I really, my dad was Adventist, but my mother never did become. I'm the youngest of 9 children and the only one to become an Adventist, except for my older sister who late in life, in her 70s, joined the church.
Interesting. And I listened to a sermon of yours, and you mentioned that your dad was very much loved reading the Bible every day, and you kind of picked up that passion from him.
Yeah. He was a man who never had much money, worked hard, working man, but he loved the Bible. And that was the greatest legacy he gave me, to read the Bible, which I follow and still do. Every year I read the New Testament twice in the original Greek and the Old Testament once.
You're of recent years, you've been involved or supportive of the One Project, and their focus is Jesus being the One. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with them?
Yeah, it was going for a number of years, and we saw it, but I really didn't know much about it. And then out of the blue, I received an invitation to speak at one of their meetings. So I went on their website, saw that what their mission statement was, to make Jesus number one in all things personal and the corporate life of the church. I thought, man, I can be part of this. And so we attended, I think it was in Seattle. Nolan and I went along. We had just so much inspiration there, so much joy. When you just focus on Jesus, it was just amazing, that meeting. After that, we went to pretty well all the meetings that followed. I spoke a number of times, came to Australia with them. We had meetings in Sydney and then in Perth. I think it's one of the best things to come along in the Adventist Church.
So yes, it was great. I remember watching your the talk that you did when you were here in Australia. I watched it on I think on YouTube, and it was fabulous to see you connecting and I guess tearing down the walls of all the generation gaps. You know, you're as much loved by the young people and every generation in between. And it was wonderful to see you embrace the one project, but for them to be embracing you as well.
Yeah, well, it is. I tell you, it's brought so much warmth and inspiration to us. When they asked me to speak, knowing that many of the attendees would be so much younger than I am, I wondered, can I connect? But boy, it was incredible.
Yeah,
And it's been like that every time.
yeah.
Every time. We have the great good fortune to attend a church that's sort of a one project church. Tim Gillespie, who's one of the main speakers, is pastor of the Crosswalk Church. And now online, they have congregations all over the place, about 8 in the US and in South America, and I think maybe in England. It's just wonderful what's happening in the last 2 years.
Why do you think the One Project received so much flack from the church? They're bringing so much love and creativity and enthusiasm, but I stumbled across a series of videos, I think Amiga something, I can't remember, I think produced by some independent ministries, fundamental independent ministries, and they were linking them with Jesuits and naming them and naming and shaming. Why do you think such an angry response?
Well, the various ways to answer that. One is, whenever the gospel is preached, clearly there'll be opposition, and sometimes violent opposition. That's sort of a simplistic answer, but I think it's valid. It's true in church history over and over. In terms of our church, I've been deeply disappointed that many of the people in leadership, and especially at the General Conference, have not seen light in this. To me, it's ironical. The church is asked to pray for revival, and the Lord sends along something that will revive the church. I mean, we met people at the One Project who said, I haven't been to church for years. I'm going to come back to church. I'm going to attend services again. So, I mean, it was bringing renewal to the church. But it did not come from above. It was not a program that came down from the top. So maybe that's part of it. But I don't want to sit in judgment, because that's the Lord's task and not mine. But I just have puzzled over this. People not just not supporting, but actively working against it and giving a hard time to these young guys. I mean, they all had full-time jobs, but this was all add-on because they believed in it, extra work.
It's a wonderful story to read a little bit about the history of how they started and how they met in a hotel room and prayed for revival.
Yeah, they did.
And it's interesting. My understanding is that they even kind of had so much pressure that they stopped doing the meetings for a while.
Well, I think, I don't know whether that was the reason. I think they were getting tired. Instead of getting support, they were just getting so much bitter opposition. I mean, some really low down stuff was happening. Even their kids were being abused on Facebook, you know, and um, when they'd be leaving a meeting, I know Sam Leonore, he's one of the 5 founders of this. He had his son with him. People came up and started, just to curse him out. I mean, it's disgusting and wrong. So, but the other way of looking at it is they must have been doing something very right.
Something right.
That's that's bitter opposition.
Has the criticism only come from the fundamental ministries, or has it come from mainstream Adventist administration as well?
Yeah, it's come from mainstream, yeah, but not uniformly. Some conference presidents have been strongly supportive. At the general conference, it's been mixed. Some support, others really, I think, wanting to shut it down, which I have never been able to figure. What I've seen, that this is a movement of the Spirit. I think it's very, very dangerous to set ourselves up in opposition to a movement of the Spirit.
There's another group within the Adventist Church called Arise, which are more reflective of the conservative, but they're still appealing to young people as well. I personally think there's a place in the church for both Arise and the One Project, but I'm noticing that more and more people at leadership level within the Adventist Church are trying to perhaps shut down the One Project or put pressure on them, but are quite supportive of the Arise Project. Why do you think that is?
Well, that reflects...
Not Arise Project, Arise Movement.
Yeah. I'm not so familiar with the Arise movement. Again, I'm sort of a big tent person. I think it's good to have differences and, not just have a single channel. But I think maybe, there's theology involved here. The One Project is so centered on Jesus only, okay? It's not Jesus plus this and this and this, okay? It's Jesus only. And that troubles a lot of people. And I think the leaders who are scared of that. Interestingly enough, Ellen White wrote, when she was in Australia, she wrote to a guy who was old, wondering what would happen after he died. And he said, my brother, I'm paraphrasing, when you come out of the grave, on that day, you'll have nothing to recommend yourself to Jesus. But if you have Jesus, that's all you need.
You'll have everything.
You'll have everything if you have Jesus. Jesus is enough.
Yeah, it's a fascinating study, the conflict and the tension between the left and right within the Adventist Church.
It's left and right. Theologically here, it's sort of justification, sanctification, and that's a false dichotomy, but those who would oppose the One Project would come down much stronger on what we have to do, what the Lord expects us to do. And some would take it all the way to, until we do this, the Lord won't come back, I think is terrible theology.
Is some of Adventism leans towards that kind of last generation theology in its very doctrine, though? Like, I remember the story of Ellen White doing a sermon where she said there will be people in this room that will be food for worms, there will be people that will be elevated to heaven, and there was those that will miss out, but that he will return before the people in this very room will die. He didn't return and some kept a list of the names of people that were in that meeting. And when the last one died, there was much crying and gnashing of teeth. But Ellen mentioned somewhere that the Lord hadn't returned to date because people weren't doing and following the teachings of the three angels' messages. What do you think about that?
I think that, I'm a believer in Ellen White, but I don't think we should make her the foundation or the source of our doctrine. We are Protestants, and all our teaching should be based on the scripture. Unless we find it in scripture, don't put much weight on it, wherever it comes from.
You think, though, that within the DNA of Adventism, there's a sense of, because we aren't doing what the message of Adventism is, the Lord's not going to return until...
I think that's changing very much.
Okay.
It may still be the case in Australia, I don't know. And certainly in certain parts of the world where the church is growing fast, it's, the church has grown and developed. Of course it must, it can't be static. Our background is, frankly, it's legalistic. 1888 was a turning point. Then through much of the 20th century, we were fundamentalists, okay? And began to break out of that about the 1950s, 1960s, when scholarship developed. More and more scholars received advanced training, and detailed studies were done of Ellen White. And people like George Knight and his books, which have really just blown open that whole fundamentalist approach with Ellen White. It's simply false, it's not true, okay? And I don't know if you've seen a recent book, what did he call it? Ellen White's Afterlife, I think, yeah. And he shows how during her lifetime, she was not made a source of doctrine. But after she died, for about 30, 40 years, more and more we tended toward inerrancy, perfect in word and in life and in doctrine. And then how the scholarship, going back to her manuscripts, studying them, just blew that out of the water. And so Knight says we have gone back to where the pioneers were in the 19th century. When I say we, not the church at large, no, but those who are reading and studying.
You mentioned that kind of revival of study in the 50s and 60s, and we're going to get to Glacier View in a moment. And I'm interested in your thoughts on the release of Questions on Doctrine in 1957, which really opened the way for an opportunity for the church to progress down the path that you're saying there has been change. But it also fired up people that wanted to go back to this golden era that you're speaking of post Ellen's passing. Can you lead into explaining what Glacier View was from the starting point of Questions on Doctrine, to give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, I can. On Questions on Doctrine, I was not involved at all in those discussions. They came in the 1950s. We were missionaries in India, came to the States in, 1975? No, it's
65.
Questions on Doctrine in the 50s, yeah. And I remember, a student at Avondale College, I went to Avondale in 1957, and Questions on Doctrine was just out, okay? And Froome and Roy Anderson were going around promoting this book, and some people were very unhappy with it. There were big arguments. That was an important development in the Adventist Church. Looking back on it, it was important in its time. I don't think the scholarship was all that great. I don't want to, it sounds condescending to speak like this, I'm sorry. But I think, you know, in terms of biblical scholarship today, we would say, you know, they were good people, and they made an important advance. But I don't think, you know, they really, I think they missed important points there. And the people with whom they dialogued, Barnhouse and Martin, they were fundamentalists themselves. So you really have that fundamentalism still running. Now, more immediately, the Glacier View now, and that came in August 10 to 15, 1980, okay? And I know much more about that. I was there, had quite a major role in that. But what is often overlooked, usually overlooked, is that in the years immediately prior to Glacier View, there were developments in the Adventist Church that sort of set the stage for Glacier View. Let me just help you with this just very, very quickly. Throughout the 1970s, the Adventist Church, there were big arguments over righteousness by faith. That was the big one, okay? And curiously enough, you had the Ministry magazine on one side and Adventist Review on the other side. Ministry under Bob Spangler was emphasizing justification. Kenneth Wood and Review, they were emphasizing sanctification. And it was strong, you know, strong disagreement. And during those years, and Des Ford had many articles published in Ministry in those years. Anyway, it became really hot. Neil Wilson is elected he takes office January 1, 1979, and immediately he issues a statement, no more discussion about righteousness by faith. I'm going to deal with it. Now, Wilson, I knew him very well. You know, he was my boss for 15 years when I was editor of the Review.
Yeah.
And we climbed Kilimanjaro together.
Wow.
Got to know each other very well, okay? But so quintessential problem solver. He loved problems. He figured he could solve any problem, big or small. So no more argument about righteousness by faith. We're going to solve it. So what does he do? And remember, it's first year of his presidency. He calls a big conference on righteousness by faith in Washington. About, must have been at least 80 people came. And all shades of opinion were invited to that, okay? Not all were church employees, but they had written or they were agitating. And so Wilson style, the first day, what happens? People just line up at the microphone and give their point of view. That's all we did for a whole day, you know. Then after that, he said, we're going to have 24, a group of 24 will follow on and try and build on this. And they became humorously known as the 24 elders, okay? And 3 of us from the seminary, I was teaching at the seminary at that time, professor of New Testament. And when we met a couple of months later, we talked a bit back and forth. And then he said, I'm going to appoint 3 people to be a committee to develop a statement on this. And he named Fritz Guy, theologian, Gerhard Hasel, Old Testament, Bill Johnsson, New Testament. We were colleagues together.
So this, he brought this committee together after that day you had. What year was that?
Oh yes, a couple of months later. The 24 came together,
Yeah.
and the 24 are still there. And then we were tasked, the 3 of us.
Right.
You know, you can't have 24 people write a statement. It doesn't work. So the 3 of us worked together, and in a remarkable way. If you ever get Fritz Guy on the program, he may tell you more about it. It was just incredible. But the way it worked, I mean, the amazing thing is, looking back today, Hazel was sort of the essence of the right wing, and Fritz Guy on the other side, the fact that they are working together. But that's the way it was before the scholar had become polarized. So I did the first draft. Fritz did the typing. I write longhand, that's how I write. And Hazel was looking up Ellen White quotations. And so we were able to bring it back within less than half a day. It was discussed and eventually voted. It was called The Dynamics of Salvation. And copies were sent out. It was published in the review. Copies went out all around the world. Feedback, but basically it didn't change. And that brought an end to righteousness, the controversy, 10-year controversy. Wilson solved it. he's the problem solver. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Now, I think this gave him the confidence that he could solve the next big problem when it came. And Desmond Ford, I think everyone will know about Des Ford. Charismatic theologian, captivating speaker, okay. Teaching at Avondale, then he was a polarizing figure also because of the way he presented his ideas. And he was sort of sent to PUC for a couple of years to let things cool down. And while he was there in 1979, on a Sabbath afternoon at a forum meeting, he gave this talk that brought the roof down, okay.
So what date was that again? 1979 in
October. I'm not sure of the date.
And it was a forum meeting.
But of course, many of them are church employees. Des said later he expected a small group. They had to keep moving one venue to another. About 1,000 people came out.
I heard that the venue was moved.
Someone recorded it. It went around the world. In this, he questioned sanctuary doctrine, especially the investigative judgment, so-called, and interpretation of prophecy. So, I mean, it was, Des was already had people strongly for him. He's a great preacher of the gospel, and people strongly against him already from the 1970s. And so now, the axes were sharpened.
This lit a fire.
Oh, did it ever? Yeah. Interestingly, at that, Glacier View came next year. So I wasn't there, but we soon heard about it at the seminary. And Wilson decided he would call a big conference, international conference, because the talk had gone around the world, to take up questions that Des had raised. They are major questions. They really went right back to the origins of our movement and teachings from the earliest days. Des was given paid leave, to write out his ideas, 6 months to do that. And a committee was set up of 14 scholars to go over his it turned out to be 1,000 pages.
Yeah.
His book, okay. To go over as he developed it, section by section. We met 3 times, I was one of them. And to give him suggestions, okay, which we did. I can tell you, he didn't change a word. We wasted our time. We spent a couple of days on each section and discussed, and some of the others, my colleagues may not have put in any ideas, suggestions, but I did, and I know some others did at least.
I'm sure he considered them though. He probably just
he did
of his resolve.
Yeah, but he was very sure about that he was right. Okay, and so he didn't change anything. So then this conference was convened in August 10 to 15, I think, of 1980 at Glacier View, which is like a retreat center run by the church, 9,000 feet up in the Rocky Mountains out from Boulder, Colorado. Beautiful place, but high altitude, the people with a bad heart. The previous vice president, you know, he couldn't come because his heart was bad, and so, but he did send a letter to be read saying, "Watch out, be careful, for to stand by the truths," you know, sort of a letter of warning, which Neil Wilson read out. So there we met in at Glacier View, about 115 people from all around the world, and variety in backgrounds, ministers, administrators, theologians, scholars, some lay people, and we met for 5 days. We were told at the outset, this is not a trial if there's fraud. He is not on trial. His views are to be considered. His views are on trial, okay? And time was spent, most of it, in breakout groups, and key questions were put, and you know, answers developed. And Wilson appointed a committee of 3 to be the writing committee, and guess who? The same 3 that worked the year before on Righteousness by Faith: Hazel, Guy, and Johnsson. And we followed the same format, except this time we had, you know, statements that came from the breakout groups. And we tried to put them together and weld them together. And we developed what we called a consensus statement. That came, Glacier View, the conference itself, was scheduled to end at noon on the Friday, okay? Friday morning, the consensus statement that we developed was brought to the floor. It was read, it was discussed, and it was voted. If not unanimously, very close. And very interestingly, Desmond Ford said, "I can agree with everything in this statement."
Yeah, I understand that people left the meeting feeling quite positive about the consensus statement.
Yeah, but here's where things went off the rails, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, so we're getting just an hour or two and the conference is going to end, and I'm feeling incredible relief.
Yeah.
Because it's been a week of high tension, you know, high drama. And then suddenly another statement appears. I had no knowledge of it beforehand. It was a statement that had been prepared by a committee of 6 the day or the night before. And it had 10 points where Des Ford, his ideas disagreed with church teaching. And it was never discussed, it was never voted, it was simply read and taken away.
So who was behind that?
I would like to know. I'll give you my speculation, and remember, speculation. I think the leaders from Australia, you know, where there was a lot of opposition to Des, that's why they'd sent him to Pacific Union College. I think they felt they had to go back with some decision to tell the people in Australia. And I think it was at their urging that this was developed. And the people who were involved in writing, the 6 people, for years I never knew who they were. They were never identified, okay?
To this day?
One was Norm Young. He could tell you, you know, Norm Young, Avondale, he could tell you. I was shocked when I heard he was on it, because these 10 points became the basis for the the stuff that Des was subjected to. That same afternoon, Friday afternoon, he was called before an administrative group, and with the Australians all there, of course, the Australian leaders. And this 10-point statement was the document that was used to really roast him. You know, all sorts of things are said about Glacier View, and all sorts of people who are not there have all sorts of opinions on it. By and large, I'm much more positive than what many say. I don't think it was a setup from the beginning, but I was at the time, and to this day, deeply disturbed by this statement brought in at the 11th hour, as it were, which to me was not following the pattern of Jesus to be open and straightforward. It just reeked of cloak and dagger stuff. That may be unfair. You could ask Norm Young or others, but I know Norm, I've heard him say, you know, when I heard that he'd been in that committee, I said, how could you be part of that group? He said, we were led to believe that this statement would be used in a totally different way. And so he felt that he'd been used.
Wow.
So that has left to this day a very bitter taste in my mouth.
Yeah, understandable. I've invited Norm onto the program this month, so
Good.
Ask
him about that. Yeah.
The climate in Kurumbong at that time, I was just a young teenager, and as a member of the church, we were kind of shielded from a lot of that. It wasn't really till the late 80s that my generation kind of looked back and realised we were right in the middle of it. And we kind of put a derogatory term towards the concerned brethren. We called them the CBs. And I feel bad about that now, but I was young. We just saw them as being old fuddy-duddies that were worried about the standards of the church, whereas now we realise they were wanting to get their church back. And that's why I mentioned questions on doctrine, because the concerned brethren who signed that document, as I think about 16 or 19 pastors that were concerned, they wrote this letter, I think, to Parmenter at the time, and they were very opposed to the new theology that perhaps grew out of questions on doctrine being released, and therefore I was just going to say, and most of them were from Kurumbong. There were lots of pastors.
Yeah.
So maybe there was an extra special kind of aim at bringing Des down because he had been right amongst them here in Kurumbong.
Yeah.
Maybe they were putting pressure on people like Norm and people like Parmenter and Tolhurst. Maybe there was a lot of pressure coming from that group. Have you heard that before?
Sort of, but you know, we've been too far away from it, to really follow up. And frankly, I was so drained by the Glacier View experience that I just didn't want to go there for years. Now, there's just sort of a postscript to the Glacier View that maybe a lot of people don't know. Des was sort of given almost an ultimatum that Friday afternoon, and they said, take time to consider. He said, I don't need any time, and basically, it was on the way out from there on. But there was a vice president of the General Conference, Duncan Eva, who was the most learned in the scriptures and in the biblical languages of all the vice presidents. Very close to Wilson, very good friend. And Wilson looked at him. For at least 2 years after Glacier View, Duncan Eva continued to work to try to bring a reconciliation with this. I know this because Duncan and I were also good friends. Okay. And there was a final meeting, and we met in San Francisco in a motel conference room, a small group by that time, I think Calvin Edwards had joined theirs. And that was sort of the last sad meeting when there's not going to be any reconciliation. Theirs had sort of hardened. And but Duncan, I just say that because I think it's important. Some people think that Wilson was out to get Neo, Dez, that Wilson set up Glacier View in order to get him removed. I don't think so.
He didn't want to get him removed, but he did want to kind of put an end to the discussion.
Yeah, and you see, he thought he could do this as he'd done the year before with righteousness by faith. You see, but theology is not really, theological discussions don't work well with a group of 115 people from all sorts of backgrounds, and all sorts of agendas. So, it's like a management approach to theology, and that's not the way you do theology.
Yeah. Who were the people that met in that meeting, the reconciliation attempt meeting at the
last one?
Yes. Who was
there's just a couple of us.
Was Neil there as well?
No. Oh no, I think he left it to Duncan. Right. Duncan, Eva, Dr. Eva, and it was a very small group of us.
Because you were friends with Des, weren't you? He was a buddy.
We go back a long way. We were friends and colleagues, yeah. Now, I disagreed with him in a number of points, but we disagreed respectfully. Yeah. And he did so much good for the church, I think, in bringing the gospel to people who never really found the gospel. And so for me, it was a tragedy. There's an Adventist tragedy. Guy of great abilities. But also, I got to say this, Peter, Des was not easy to help. If you want to sort of speak in more political terms, he was his own worst enemy, okay? I think, for me, the critical moment at Glacier View, and the saddest, is one that Des remembered very differently from me, because I saw him on a program of yours some time back. He said at Glacier View he'd been treated fairly except for Wilson. Okay, Wilson was very unfair to him. And he referred to a meeting that came about Tuesday or Wednesday, and probably Wednesday, in which Wilson made a long appeal. Wilson never spoke short. He'd say, I'll give a few remarks, then he'd speak for 45 minutes. Okay, that's Wilson. Okay. But, he'd go everywhere, he'd cover all the bases. So anyway, he makes this long speech. It's like an evangelistic appeal. And it winds up like this. Now, Des, we're not asking you to go against your conscience, but will you take these ideas that you have where others may not see light in them? Will you just put them in your pocket and not promote them until the church sees light in them? So he makes this appeal, and Des simply walks out. Okay. Now that was the saddest moment to me, because to me, Wilson put himself on the line in front of the leaders of the world church, and it was like Des rebuffed him. Now, Des was under tremendous pressure. Maybe he misunderstood. And in that program that I referred to, he said he was treated very unkindly by Wilson. He referred to that moment. Okay. But, that's Glacier View. So many different views. And as we were walking out, I walked out with Dr. Grady Smoot, president of Andrews University. And he said, this was so sad. Okay. We both felt this was the moment where, it could have turned around. If he simply said, yeah, thank you. I'll continue to study, but I won't promote these ideas. But anyway, other things happened after that day. But I tell you, to me, it was like a dagger in the heart. Now,
a sad day. And
Oh, it was a sad day.
another
It sounds
sad.
like I'm blaming him. And, he was under such pressure, and so I just don't understand. I just don't
Was Neil
understand.
Wilson maybe a good politician at manoeuvring events? He was keen
Oh,
to
yeah.
put an end to
But
this discussion, and so maybe there was a little bit of behind the scenes work that ensured Des would eventually just throw up his arms
I
and
don't
walk
know.
away.
I think if Wilson wanted to get rid of Des from the ministry, as is quite widely believed, I think it was an extraordinary way to go about it.
Mm.
To go to all expense, call in all these people, and then who's the committee sets up? They're not Wilson political type. 3 scholars from the seminary, okay.
Mm.
We're the ones who wrote this statement, you see. Why go to all that, you see? Again, though, the missing piece of the puzzle is that document never discussed, never voted, that became critical. That, to me, reeks of whatever. Not nice, not good stuff.
It'd be interesting to know, as you said, Norm felt that he was kind of perhaps used a bit there. It'd be interesting to know who was using him, who were the players that used Norm.
Well, I am almost 100% certain that the initiative for this statement came from the Australian leaders.
Right.
I'm almost 100% sure.
Now,
And,
one of the really sad things about it was many, many young Adventist ministers left. And as I said, I was just a teenager. And in Cooranbong, here in Australia, near Avondale College, we had a very vibrant youth kind of program, mainly because of lots of really great young Adventist ministers. From the Central Coast right up to Newcastle, there was always social events, music programs. It was amazing. It was like the One Project kind of environment. And I just remember noticing all of a sudden, all the young guys left. And I remember sitting there one night, and our only social engagement was table tennis once a month, Tuesday, at the Memorial Youth Hall. And I thought, what's going on? But I was too young to really put it together, but now I know. But what a tragedy to lose so many young ministers
oh, yeah.
as a result of Glacier View.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's, there was an informal conference convened last October, 40 years to the day, was the actual date, 40 years along from Des's Sabbath afternoon forum presentation that brought the house down. It was convened, it was unofficial, there were no papers, there was no minutes were kept. It was by invitation only, 2025, historians and theologians. And we reminisced about Desmond Ford and about Glacier View.
Wow.
Trying to figure out how important is this in Adventist history. Okay?
Yeah.
Looking back. Some there said, this is the most important event in our history. I think, but then at the end, again, there were no votes or no minutes, okay. We didn't decide whether it was or wasn't. But the general consensus was, we are still too close to it to be able to judge its importance. It was very important. I think it ranks with 1888, but it's more important than 1888 or not, I don't know.
It's possibly more important in a way that it's kind of split the church in two without the members even realizing it.
Yeah, especially in the South Pacific, it's just, and the healing is, the split has never been healed there, the wound.
No.
Which to me is...
And our leaders tend to not want to talk about it at all. It's very difficult to
oh, yeah, that's right.
Leaders
Don't talk about it.
Speak about it.
Yeah.
Can I just shift gears for a moment? Still relating to this, um, I've watched maybe 20 times in the last 4 years um, the John Anchorberg interviews. There's one with him and Des, there's one with you and Walter Martin, there's one with Walter Ray and Des. And
Yeah.
they're about an hour and a half long, and I've just, for some reason, found them a really rich resource of information. Now, again, I'm not bringing up questions on doctrine it just seems to me a pivot point for the current tension. That's the only reason I keep bringing it up. When I watch these interviews, I'm kind of I'm aware that because of the release of Questions on Doctrine, the church went from perhaps 1 million members to, by the time you were on the Anchorberg show, to about 4 million. So the kind of new theology, the presentation of Adventism is a little bit more evangelical. Those that don't know much about Questions on Doctrine may not realise that the book put forward Adventists in a better light. Barnhouse and Martin were about to release a book including Adventists about the cults, and they were going to include Adventists as a cult.
That's right.
And
Martin wrote the book, The Kingdom of the Cults.
That's right.
A chapter on Adventism.
And of course, Adventists were like, whoa, we don't want to be considered a cult. So that book addressed that, and Walter Martin went away saying, well, perhaps, yeah, you're not a cult.
What do you think? He put us in the appendix.
He
kept us in the book, but we went moved to the appendix.
It's a sect, not a cult. And he, so in some ways, the book created this kind of pathway for a more academic approach that Des brought to things. People began really digging deep into righteousness by faith and Adventist doctrine and new theology, and perhaps one project can find a link back to the positive nature of that, and perhaps more conservative groups can link it back to the Concerned Brethren and the Standish Brothers and whatnot. But the church did grow a lot during that time period, and I just want to briefly touch on your interview with Anchorberg, because I noticed that Walter Martin seemed to have a particular feeling that maybe he'd been duped a little bit, and here we are. Was it 1984-ish?
It was 84. By now, I was editor of the review.
Of the review,
and still young and somewhat foolish.
How old were you in 84?
Well, when I say young and foolish, I was not all that young. I was early 50s, but
that's still young.
No, early 50s. Yeah.
So, as you're going into this meeting, the Adventist Church was at the crossroads. I think Time magazine had put Adventists on the cover of one of the magazines. We had the Des Ford thing was going on. The attacks on Ellen White regarding plagiarism was going on. The Davenport financial disaster fiasco was going on. And then you're put in the seat. And I thought you were very brave to even accept that, but good on you. I think a lot of people were invited and turned down, but you didn't. So I just want to, just with a little bit of that background, I want you to talk about your feelings of that show, Walter Martin. What was it like meeting John Anchorberg, who's still doing amazing work to this?
It's still going.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that experience and how you felt being put on the spot.
It was one of the toughest experiences of my whole life, maybe the toughest, okay?
Yeah.
In some ways, I was disappointed. I felt I'd been somewhat tricked.
Right.
I'll give you a little background, okay?
Yeah.
So I'd never seen the show, okay? I never didn't know what it was until I got a letter out of the blue from Anchorberg's producer saying that, listing all the people that they invited. There was a whole string of them, you know. And week by week, they would read out this list. It looked like the Adventist Church was chicken, okay?
Right.
And so I got this letter. Well, it was a copy of a letter to Neil Wilson, requesting, president at the General Conference, requesting that he appear and if you could not do that, Dr. William Johnsson would be acceptable. So I went to Neil. There's no way that the president should ever walk into that sort of scene. And by now I was feeling, frankly, a bit angry. Okay,
Yeah.
because here,
afterwards, you mean?
What's that?
After the meeting, or as you became aware of it?
By what was going on, the fact that all these leaders were being named, invited, and no one would appear. Okay.
Right.
All turning it down. We look like, what sort of people are we, Adventists? We have the truth. We're ashamed to stand up and speak what we believe. So I went to Neil, and he said, of course I can't appear. But he said, if you would, he said, it'll be a setup. But if you can only come across as someone who really believes the gospel, a true follower of Jesus, that will be enough. That was his suggestion to me. Mm. Now, sort of young and foolish in that sense, not politically hardened, okay. Really didn't know what I was letting myself in for. It's television, and television thrives on controversy. Okay?
Bit of drama.
Not on making pieces on us against them, Yeah. Anyway, so in preparation for it, I got access to some of the talks Martin was giving and they were recorded in different venues around the country. You see, this is now in the 1980s. Questions on Doctrine that went through hundreds of thousands. Mass printings of that book went everywhere, subsidized by the General Conference. Huge impact around the world. Martin's book is now due for reprinting, and he's getting second thoughts and starting to make noises that maybe he'll pull us out of the appendix and put us back in, because we've sort of retreated from Questions on Doctrine and gone back. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the background.
And some would say he had a leg to stand on.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I'm working with the producer, is the one notifying me, we'll fly you down. It was Chattanooga, Tennessee. It'll be taped on a Monday night. Come a day early, so you'll be rested up. Sunday night, we'll meet you at the plane, put you in a motel, and then on Monday, you and Martin can sit down and you meet Anchorberg, have lunch and get acquainted. So, okay, all went, according to the plan, at least on the Sunday. Monday, I'm waiting for the taxi or the car to come and pick me up. I get a phone call saying, sorry, we can't make the luncheon appointment. We'll meet tonight. We'll have supper together. Okay. I began to feel there's something not quite right here. So with a few doubts, I came to the evening, and what happened? Another phone call. Sorry, the supper is off. Okay. We won't be able, no time to get together. I did not meet Martin until we went before the cameras.
Wow.
To me, that was, I don't know, you make of it what you like. To me, I felt I'd been misled.
Yeah.
And perhaps betrayed. Okay. So Martin, big burly guy, and he had a big cross around, big metal cross. And when he leaned forward, it would go clank and hit the microphone, and eventually they had to take it off. Almost his approach was sort of bullying. Okay?
Yeah.
And maybe that came across. It was.
Yeah.
And Anchorberg, I could hardly stop looking at his hair was so white, is this guy for real or what, So here's the way. We're going to tape in 15-minute intervals, okay? Martin will have a say, and then you'll have a chance to respond. So after the introductions, Martin begins. He comes out with a whole, potpourri of statements, which he has taken from Adventist publications. They're not falsified. And frankly, embarrassing statements. Statements, some of them went back to old writings, like Bible readings, the home circle, which makes Christ a created being, really embarrassing stuff. So he goes on and on and on, about 10 minutes. And I'm thinking, boy, how do I begin to answer all this, And so Anchorberg says, okay, Bill, here's your chance. So I start to respond and say, cut. Okay, great.
Oh.
So Martin gets 10 minutes, so I get 2 minutes. I thought, what is this? I said, and then this is the way it went. Then by after the second 15-minute segment, they had a little longer break. I went to Anchorberg and I said, look, this is not fair. Okay. I'm not given a chance. Martin is dominating. He said, well, you should interrupt him. You should cut in.
Ah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was frankly getting angry. The longer it went, I felt the misgivings I'd had the night before, or the morning before when the lunch was cancelled. I began to feel this thing was a setup, In the breaks, Martin and Anchorberg huddled, and they had cue cards. They were exchanging who was going to ask what. Okay, so Anchorberg was not the anchor at all.
Yeah.
In some ways, he was more aggressive than Martin. So that's the way it went. It went on the taping went on for, I don't know, until after 10 o'clock at night. And I got very tired and just wanted to get out of there.
I think it was good that you kept bringing back to saying, look, it's not what this person says or that person says. Let's go back to what the 27 or whatever, how many
that was 27 at that time. That was my defense.
To that.
And then later, some people seeing the show, some editors said, all you can talk about is the fundamental beliefs. I said, but they are the only official statements, the voted statements. Whether whoever said this in the ministry or review, that doesn't have the same weight as the official voted statement from the General Conference session. So they cut it up into 5 segments. We taped for several hours. They did not distort my words, but they left out stuff where I scored points on nothing.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that they'd actually edited. I knew they edited between the programs. It was all one night, but they did it over 5 weeks, made it look like 5 weeks. But
did, yeah.
I didn't realize they actually cut during the program.
Said, we're going to have questions, and so they have people standing at the mic. There's no one standing at the mic right until the very end. There were no questions until almost the end. But at one point, Martin got into the book of Hebrews, and he quickly got out of that.
I noticed that because that's kind of one of your fortes of study, isn't it? The Hebrews.
Yeah, my doctoral dissertation is there.
And I noticed that he started and you then went, well, actually, this is what it possibly says. And he just suddenly changed tack. He got out quick there.
Yeah, there's other stuff like that. So, but they did not distort my words, they didn't sort of cut and splice.
No.
They had me say things that I really didn't say. But I don't know, I have very mixed feelings about it. I came back to the room, but didn't sleep the whole night. Because under the pressure, those hours, I wondered if I said something, inadvertently, that the enemies of the church can use against the church. If I betrayed my church, betrayed my Lord. And I couldn't think of anything, but the whole night, my brain was going over, I never slept the whole night. The reaction of it was very interesting, Peter, because I got some very negative letters from people, Adventists, who said, you've let down Ellen White for the world,
I think though, if you stand up and speak your truth, I think that's what is important. And I felt good on you. No one else was willing to get up and speak their truth.
Kenneth Wood, who is now ex-editor of the Review, he was not happy with it. Somehow he knew what had happened. By the next morning, he knew what I'd said. So I don't know how he got access to that.
Wow.
He was the chairman of the White Estate Board. I was a member of the board.
And what did he say to you?
Well, it was sort of, wasn't directly. It was just sort of what was said and then not said, And so I had a chance to uphold Ellen White, and I dropped the ball. But one question in particular focused that, Peter. See, in hearing tapes of Martin's talks, the giving around the country prior to my appearance on the show, one of the questions he asked was, is Ellen White an infallible interpreter of Scripture? That was one of the key questions.
That was a big one.
His big one. That was sort of like his ace, okay. That was his key card. So eventually, he has this, at some point in the program, he has this long build up, and then he, sort of looks at me, is she an infallible interpreter of Scripture? And I said, no.
I know.
I said, what?
Yeah.
But Bob Spangler said this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so. I said, I do not believe she's infallible interpreter of Scripture. But of course, there are a lot of Adventists who did believe that and who still believe that.
And John Anchorberg suddenly leapt in and said, now I'm a bit worried about your position. You might go the way of Des now.
He said that, yeah.
I thought you answered that pretty well, though.
I think I'm ready to go back and listen to it after all these years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't want to hear it. It was so painful.
You were gracious in taking it that you don't have a fear because you feel that you're accepted within your church and that it's okay for people in the Adventist church to share different viewpoints. He then did say, well, that didn't happen to Des. It was interesting because Walter Martin raised a little bit about plagiarism. I'm not going to go, that's for a whole other conversation. But they touched a little bit on the Davenport thing. Just a quick aside for 1 minute. What are your thoughts on that? The
Davenport Fiasco?
Like it just kind of disappeared and no one was ever really held accountable for it. How did that happen? Because my understanding is actually some of the church's money was used. It wasn't just people falling for a Ponzi scheme. Actual church money to upwards of $20 million, $1978, $79, which is a massive amount of money.
Much of that was recovered, I believe.
Because I think Neil Wilson said they were going to do an investigation, but there was never any release of the results of
There was an investigation.
There
and
was?
The chair of that committee was an Australian, the treasurer, Lance Butler. Okay.
Oh.
I know this because I'm sharing a lot of stuff here tonight today that maybe a lot of people don't know about. Most people don't know. I was in my first year editor, okay, when the Davenport scandals broke in the year before. I was associate editor 2 years. Now I'm editor, okay. And the committee set up, chaired by Lance Butler, votes that the names of the offenders, if you like, will be published in the review, and which is like public shaming. Okay, so I was out at Loma Linda for a meeting, and had a call from a reporter, one of the papers out in the West, saying, "Is it true that the review is going to publish the names?" I said, "Yeah." Okay, I was quite clear on it. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to get things happening to my conscience. Is this the role of the church paper, to shame people who do wrong? It came to the point where after some time, I went to Neil Wilson. We used to meet every week or so, a brown bag lunch in his office, bring sandwiches. So I went to him to say this: "Neil, if you want me to publish those names, it'll have to be someone else. I'm out.
Wow.
I'm not going to publish that." But that's the speech I had made.
Yeah.
Before I could ever get it out, he says, "Bill, I've been thinking about those names.
Right.
I don't think we should publish them in the review."
Was there a behind the scenes, did they get told off? Did they lose their jobs? Did they go to
Some did,
jail?
yeah.
Did they have to
Some were demoted, yeah. But I'll tell you something else. The list of names that was originally drawn up, upon further investigation, some of those names were crossed off.
Oh, okay.
Considered not to have misused their office. So, think if those names had been published,
Yes.
it's unforgiving.
Yes.
Once it's out there, you can't, even if you print a retraction saying they shouldn't have been there, it's there forever.
The mud would have stuck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Were the names mentioned in Pirates of Privilege by Walter Ray?
In what? What was that?
That Walter Ray that wrote The White Lie, didn't he write another book called Pirates of Privilege?
I never saw that book.
He was going to release it, and the church threatened to take away his sustentation or something, and so he promised not to release it. But after he died, his son released it online. It's available for free online if you just search Pirates.
Legally, the church cannot take away sustentation here in America. The church cannot take it away. It used to be like that.
It intrigued me why he didn't publish it.
No, I'm not aware of that book.
Right.
Walter Ray, I was involved in that one too. I was on the committee that had the initial hearing.
Mm.
That, Ray was an interesting character. It's sort of how often people go from one extreme to the other. People who knew him said he used to go to the pulpit with an arm full of red books when he preached, okay? But, he flipped from being like a verbal inspirationist, every word inspired, to rejecting Ellen White, just switched. But his research...
It may have been such a shock for him, though.
Oh, yeah.
I know when I read that book, I actually had to stop reading it, and I didn't read it again for about 4 years.
Oh, yeah. But this was the myth of Ellen White that was current there for 50 years during the 20th century.
That relates to the 1919 conference, doesn't it?
What's that?
It relates to the night where they discussed that very thing, and I think the actual minutes for the meeting weren't discovered till about 1976.
That's right. They were put away in the archives in a dark corner.
How many other dark corners are there?
when they were, I shouldn't have said dark corner, but when they were discovered, it was Don Mansell, I think, discovered them. He didn't do anything about it for a couple of years, but then I think it was Don McAdams, who was then teaching history at Andrews University, played a major role, with that, and then with a study of great controversy in Ellen White's use of sources, which is really heavy, word for word, plagiarism, we have to say today, you know. But so the myth of Ellen White, you know, was exploded by Ray, and there's a whole series of others. And I've got to say this, in the White estate at that time, the secretary was Bob Olson. He was there, I think, for 19 years. And Olson, he had moved from a fundamentalist view, first of all, of Scripture and Ellen White. In his doctoral studies, he was exposed to the, if you like, not the problems, but the evidence of Scripture, which you cannot believe in verbal inspiration or fundamental if you really go back and study Scripture, especially in the original. And so he did his doctoral studies in Dallas, Texas, and his views changed. And so he's at the White estate at a critical time. And during that period, the view of Ellen White just changed dramatically. But, you know, that's an oversimplification. So that's why George and I would say we've come back, those of us who are read and informed, to the 19th century view of Ellen White, which is a more accurate view.
Do you think with the release of the compliance document becoming a policy or a document that now has teeth, do you think that's kind of going to turn Adventism into one big 3ABN kind of fellowship?
Oh, I hope not. Does it have teeth?
Well, were the 6 unions warned already? And this, I felt so sorry for Jan Paulsen when I watched the Autumn Council, where he was pleading with these guys to not go down the path they were going. And I think Ted Wilson just went, okay, thank you, but you all voted for it last year. Well, and I thought, wow, yeah, bit disrespectful.
Yeah, well, you know, once I was part of it, you know, I was in the General Conference for 25 years and, you know, involved in some pretty heavy stuff. That was my life, okay? But I look back on it now and I don't miss it at all. They're good people there and they mean well, but it's a bubble, okay?
Right.
The real church is the local church.
If you're in a union and you're sanctioned, then that'll trickle down to you keeping control of your conferences, and that'll trickle down to the grassroots church members too, won't it? Like women's ordination. If your union is warned because you're not because you're supporting it, then that'll affect the conferences and that'll affect the grassroots people. Don't you think it's a trickle down effect?
Peter, you need to spend some time here in California, in the Pacific Union, okay?
Yeah.
The Pacific Union is a big union and contributes a lot of money to the Treasury. We have Pacific Union College, we have Glacier University, we have Loma Linda University, premier health institution. And frankly, Pacific Union does what it does. So the General Conference needs the Pacific Union more than the Pacific Union needs the General Conference. It's not a threat. It's reality. It's reality.
Okay. When the GC sessions hopefully commence after the COVID crazy has passed, will Ted Wilson be president again, do you think?
I don't think so. But who knows? But it doesn't, I used to think a lot about these things, not much anymore. We have a wonderful church we attend, and we have our ministry. I'm writing, you know, I write, most days I write and do some speaking, and we're very happy. Okay.
You meet in a really nice Sabbath school gathering as well. I've watched a few of your interviews and presentations there. It sounds like a great place to be. There's a similar one here at Avondale that meets every week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I've attended that one. Yeah.
yeah, was it called something 17, named after the lecture room or something that they attend?
I don't know the name of it.
It's a
When,
fascinating. I've been a couple of times over the years there.
yeah.
You feel like you can
We,
speak with freedom and be accepted.
oh, yeah. Most of the people are faculty members or retired faculty. Very interesting group. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
But thinking about Glacier View and so on, I had a position, it was really a privileged position. I don't want to make that sound as though I'm special or anything, but I was there. And so, I can give perspectives on Glacier View.
Exactly.
I'm sure that people who see this today who won't agree with some of that, that's fine, yeah, okay. Because the 1,000 different views on Glacier View,
Mm.
okay. Because I think it was a very, very important event. And I do think it was, I can only think about the might have been. If that paper hadn't been brought in,
Mm.
never voted, never discussed, which became the critical, it was sort of like the charge sheet against theirs. To me, that's a great statement.
Imagine, because my generation, we wouldn't have suddenly lost all the mentors. Like literally, we went from being 15-year-olds with people that were in their early 20s and people 30s to my next youth leader was 55 when I was 16, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So imagine if those 200 or however many people left had stayed.
Some conferences, they basically, a lot of ministers left, others, their conference administration dealt with it differently, and folk, sort of worked things out, continued on the ministry and became very important leaders, some of them. I was there at some of the workers' meetings and they were hot. There was anger and there was pain. For a couple of years after Glacier View, that was my life. I was at the review, but I had many, many appointments. I come back and I was just drained because of all the stuff, the anger and the pain out there. I want to just say one last thing about theirs, that I don't know if this is recognized or not. Des's views, by and large, have been accepted by the church. People who are listening will not want to hear that, but it's true, okay? Even, the real test of theology at the practical level, look at the hymns people sing. The hymns that are no longer in a hymn book that were there when I became an Adventist, okay? The judgment is set. How shall we stand in that great day? Shall we be found before him wanting? It's all uncertainty. We don't know, okay? That was the old church. And Des had a pastoral interest and concern because people didn't have the assurance of salvation. That hymn's not even in the book anymore, see? So we've come a long way. And, I tried to tell Des, Des, you're still fighting battles in many ways. The church has gone on from there. But anyway.
Did you agree with his theology at the time? And if not, how did you do it?
Yes and no. He used to say, he said it often, and it made, I think, many of us mad, speaking of theologians. He'd say, all the theologians agree with me. Well, we agreed that he was asking the right questions, but we didn't agree with the answers he was giving.
It's a pity that Neil Wilson felt he really wanted to draw a line under it, because if his attitude had been, let's keep this going, let's keep it open, let's keep it inclusive, which I thought was kind of the direction the church was going when Jan Paulsen was president. There seemed to be an openness for both sides to still be welcomed into the church.
The pendulum swings back, okay.
Yeah. But you still have a sense of hope, though.
Oh, yeah, of course. I believe in Jesus. He's Lord of the church, okay. Whatever happens at the General Conference, okay, I'm confident. I'm hopeful. but I don't look to solutions to come out of the General Conference, okay? I think this COVID-19 is likely to impact the treasury of the church massively. So the General Conference is going to have to be cut way back. The money won't be there. And I think it's a good thing. In my book, I suggest it ought to be cut way back. Already they've cut voted that future sessions will be cut way back. It's just right out of what I advocate in my book. Right down the line.
Yeah, you predicted
so,
it.
And I don't know what the SPD is like now, but in many divisions, and I won't go beyond saying that, they're top heavy. There's way too many people at top in administration. The real life of the church is the local church. And we've got to get more money back to the local church and support the local church pastor.
But the local church members are giving all their money to Doug Batchelor and Amazing Facts, and
that's another story.
So the money comes from the SPD into the local members. The members give it back to other ministries.
No, well, I'm a Big Ten person, though some of the theology that's out there, I think is terrible theology. It's just bad theology. Okay? And
how convinced are you that something special and supernatural and unique happened on October 22, 1844?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that question. The idea, you got to remember, I come at everything from a biblical basis, okay? And especially a New Testament basis. The Old is very, very important. They work together. The idea from a biblical point of view about a particular date in time, and remember, our thinking and our theology is so centered in America and American culture and American events that, I just can't accept it in the old way of thinking about it. I can accept it in the sense that I believe God is Lord of time, okay, and space. That things will not go on and on forever. That Jesus will come back, okay? And I can accept that we've come to a time when it's going to all wrap up. But beyond that, we have big, big questions. We are now, look, nearly 200 years on from 1844. How can we say that he's coming soon? Okay. We've been saying that for 200 years. What does soon mean? Only in the sense of the New Testament, he's coming soon. You find it there. So every believer really hopes that he'll come soon. I hope he'll come soon. Okay. And for me, listen, I'm 85. He's coming soon for me. Really, what is more important, how we live, or whether we try to get all the calculations right to figure out when.
Does that make this, like a lot of young people don't know what the investigative judgment even is that good then? Is it better for this stuff just to kind of float away and...
Better than the way we used to teach it, to leave people in fear and doubt about their standing with God. That's a terrible, it's so anti-New Testament, anti-Jesus, who taught that the kingdom of God has come now, okay? It's good news, it's here. And so that's part of the bad theology. The other side, there's a good side to our emphasis on what we call the investigative judgment. At Glacier View, we turned away, and in the consensus statement, we talk about the pre-Advent judgment rather than the investigation. Wrong connotation. But the idea of judgment is a biblical teaching, Old Testament and to New Testament. And it's in Jesus, the words and teachings of Jesus. But in the judgment, God is on our side. That's the point. He's not trying to keep us out of heaven. He's trying to get us into heaven. But what form that judgment takes, I don't think there are books, and people coming through the pages.
Yeah. If there was, evidence that 100% proved that nothing happened October 22, 1844, you'd still remain an Adventist?
Yeah, because I am, first of all, a follower of Jesus. Okay. I'm an Adventist not because of the church, but because of Jesus. Okay. And I've part of my work toward the end, especially, was I was involved in interfaith dialogues, a lot of them, as a member of the dialogue team for 25 years, and then as the chairman of the team. And we've met with pretty well all the major denominations, not the Catholic Church, but the Presbyterians and the Lutherans and the Baptists and Salvation Army. You think we've got problems? You ought to sit down with them. Yeah. When you get to know each other and they open up, boy, we don't have problems compared with what they have. Okay.
Yeah.
But they're wonderful people out there. I believe this is the Remnant Church, in the sense that we are part of God's people that He has. He's always had a remnant, always. And we'll have in the last days. We'll be loyal and faithful to Him. And we'll meet Him when Jesus comes back.
You'll see here Lance, who in many ways initiated this actual conversation. So we thank you, Lance, for that. Lance is a 21-year-old studying theology. I think he's in his third year. Is that right, Lance?
Yeah.
And he wrote to me. He'd listened to some of the SDAQ&A podcast. He said, it'd be fascinating to have Pastor Johnsson on your podcast. And I said, look, that would be impossible. I'm sure we could never organise that. And next minute he writes back to me an email, and he'd contacted you, and you had graciously said yes, you would chat with us. So Lance, we thank you for that. And then that triggered this whole, hey, let's chat to people about Glacier View this in the month of May, which may go into June a little bit. So I'm going to get Lance to ask you some questions in a moment from a young person's perspective. So Lance, over to you.
Hey, hi, Dr. Bill.
Hi.
Greetings from Mountain View College. I have a few questions here, Dr. Bill. How do you want the Glacier View event to be remembered, especially for the young people? Because for most of us, for those who are interested, they kind of view Glacier View and Des Ford, especially like he was some sort of a Adventist boogeyman who was out to destroy the church. Sort of, how do you want it to be remembered, especially for the young people?
Well, let me start with Des Ford, okay, where I stand. Des was my friend, okay, and colleague. We never worked together, we never taught together, but I'd say we loved each other and respected each other. It hurt me enormously with the way things happened after Glacier View. And even until recent years, I was part of efforts to try to bring about a reconciliation of Des with the church in the South Pacific. Went to his daughter, Ellen, who's a very sharp person, wonderful person. She hoped that she could facilitate a reconciliation. She asked me if I'd be part of it, and I agreed. And we went to Australia, but it fell apart. Basically, I think in church politics, it fell apart. So let me just say that, Lance, first of all, Des, I think, was an Adventist tragedy. I think he made a big contribution to the church in helping people to find the assurance of salvation. That is a huge contribution. But I think he is also a tragic figure in that he was so sure he was right. He found it difficult to listen to others and to think that others might have something to help him with. It really concerned me very much. This 14-member committee that met with him prior to Glacier View to go over his book that he was writing, that he accepted not one idea. Now, you know, I mean, these are all PhDs, okay? Old Testament experts, theologians, New Testament, okay? Is he the only one who's right? Okay. So that's a weakness he had and had to his dying day, I think. He was too sure he was right. And so when, after he passed, I wrote a little piece. It was on the Spectrum blog. Desmond Ford, The Perils of Being Right. I think it's not just Des Ford. Over and over, we've got to be right. You know, I'm right and you're wrong. Hey, God is the one who knows it all. We don't know it all. Okay? So humility is very much in order. So I would like Des Ford to be remembered not as someone who tried to destroy the church. I think he loved the church. I think he had a pastoral interest in his work in the ministry. He met too many members who were unsure whether when they died they'd be saved. Unsure. A terrible way to live as a Christian. And that stemmed from the investigative judgment idea. I think that's what drove Des in many respects. So remember Des as a man who I think was a very important person, maybe a great person, but who was flawed, as we're all flawed, okay? And Glacier View, I think, was a tragedy, okay? It was an opportunity missed. But the strange and amazing thing is that Des's ideas eventually carried the day. In the West, I'm not sure that they did around the world even today, because much of the church in the developing world is still sort of 19th century theology. Don't want to put them down, it's just that here in the West we've had longer to grow and to develop.
I think most of the people here are still very much traditionalistic in their theology, especially here in the Philippines where it's still that way. And most of the people, I think, who know about the Glacier View event don't know about the 10-point statement and that it was not voted on. And it was, I think...
Never discussed, never voted.
So my next question is, if the consensus statement was followed and if Des Ford stayed within the church, because since you said that he accepted it, what do you think would be the church's plans going forward if that was the case?
Who knows? Des had so many talents. He was, in his nature, he was a wonderful debater. Use that in a positive sense. He actually, when he was in the ministry, he debated with ministers of other churches and just creamed them, you know. He's just a powerful debater. His natural way of presenting was, it's not this, it's that, even in his sermons, over and over. Not this, that. Debating style. But that also has the impact of audience sort of not agreeing with him, but taking the other side. So, you know, it's a great failure of the church not to recognize what he had to give to the church. He could have been used in ways, you know, to build up the church and to put it forward. But again, he would have to be ready to except to work within certain limitations and to be patient, you know. Religious organizations, all of them, not just Adventists, are slow to change, okay? And they never say, this doctrine that we've held for 500 years is wrong. You find the Catholic Church coming up and saying that. They won't, okay? The Presbyterians used to, I mean, with John Calvin, this idea of election, you know, and predestination, major doctrine. Today, they don't talk about it. You know, in one of our dialogues, we met with over in Geneva from the World Presbyterian organizations. We brought up predestination. Guess what? They didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to even answer a question. It's an embarrassment to them. And you see, so doctrines that are wrong, they gradually fall away. But theirs wasn't prepared for that. You know, he wanted to fight. Okay, now.
Also, I want to speak about this. I'm going to invite Robert Brinsmead in a future episode. What can you say about his indirect connection to the PUC Forum and then the Glacier View conference?
Well, I really don't have particular knowledge on that. Robert Brinsmead and I were fellow students at Davenport College, so I knew him quite well. At that time, he was very much a sort of a last generation person. He used to quote Ellen White by the paragraph, you know, and everybody would sort of stand back and sort of amazed. No one went and actually checked whether he was quoting correctly. He probably was, but you know, he was sort of like considered an amazing person. But he was very much a perfectionist. He started a movement. Well, by the way, for the final year at college, we would have graduated in the same class. The college wanted him to sign a statement that he would not preach certain doctrines as a student, okay? Because we used to go out preaching. Do you do that? Go out and preach around the churches. But
yeah,
you know, he'd go out and preach about Armageddon and so on, and the churches would get upset and would come back to the teachers, you know, what's happening with your students, you know, they're just messing up the churches. And so he was asked to sign a statement. He refused, and so he was not accepted back. He never graduated. So at that point, he was far, far right, okay. He started a movement called the Sanctuary Awakening Fellowship, pulled in a number of ministers. And that, the heart of that was that the cleansing of the sanctuary is the cleansing of the human heart before Jesus comes, meaning we have to be perfect. That's before Jesus will come. It's the soul temple that must be cleansed. That's where he was. And he was there for a number of years, and then guess what? He flipped totally to the other side and started Verdict magazine, which was all justification, justification, justification. And, you know, we were in India, and he was in Australia, so couldn't follow closely, but he eventually abandoned everything, you know. I think the last issue of Verdict that I saw, he was into form criticism of the Gospels. I thought, he's on a trajectory that's going to take him right away from faith. And that's what happened.
Thank you, Dr. Bill.
Okay.
Thank you, Lance. They were very insightful questions. I think this young man's going to go a long way, don't you, Bill?
Yeah, Lance, let me ask you a question now, okay?
Okay.
What year are you in your studies?
I'm currently an incoming third-year student.
And it's 4-year degree?
Yeah.
Okay. And what are your plans? What do you hope to do?
I'm planning to go to IS.
Yeah. It's a good school.
Graduation.
I've
Yeah.
been there, yeah. Yeah. I've given lectures at IS, yeah. So that's good. And will you work on a master's there or what?
Yeah, hopefully, God willing.
So you want to be a teacher or whatever?
Yeah, probably like you.
You've got a good mind, brother. But, you know, could I just say one thing that may sound a bit strange? You know,
Sure.
I've been involved in theology for many years. I've learned to have a certain distrust about theological studies because there's often a lot of pride involved.
Mm.
That's why if you want an ugly argument, a theological argument is hard to beat. The stuff that happens in theological arguments, trying to prove that I'm right and you're wrong, because then we bring in God and hell and heaven on our side, you know. Your ideas will take us right down the road to perdition. And so this is not new. This goes right back nearly 2,000 years in the history of the Christian church. Ugly arguments in the early centuries even fought battles, actual battles over these sort of questions.
Pride, power, money, and ego.
Yeah, but you know what? I just want to say this. It's all about Jesus, okay?
Amen.
And it's not what we believe, but who we believe, and it's who we know.
Mm.
And it's about living as Jesus lived. We feel privileged. We live in Loma Linda, and you know, I taught in retirement. I taught for several years in the School of Religion. Okay, was taught the Jesus and world religions, but everything at Loma Linda is concerned about health, about better living. Okay, about making men and women whole. So you don't have theological arguments around here. Why? This is a place, it's a big institution. I mean, it has 15,000 plus employees, the university and hospital. It has 8 hospitals, actually. But people are concerned with saving the lives of people who are dying, suffering and dying. And in that context, all these theological arguments, you know, they really shrink. They really shrink.
Mm.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, is Dan Jackson still president of
Yes.
North American Division, is it?
Yeah, but he's retiring. Whether he'll hang on to next year, I don't know. He's waiting to get out. You know, he's had a tough job.
I loved him. Did he call a lot of what was said hooey? Is that the word he used?
Yeah.
I thought, this guy's an interesting guy.
He is. He's Canadian.
Is he really? Yeah. Hey, maybe you can put a good word in and we'll try and get him to do an interview with us.
He's probably, after he gets out Monday, you know, that poor guy is just, he looks tired, he's worn out. And, you know, it's not been easy. He defends the North American Division, which of course is in the bad, the black pages of the General Conference. Again, come to Pacific Unions, you just see, we are free out here, okay? And it may sound arrogant, but yeah, you know, it's being realistic. Pacific Union, if the General Conference vanished, Pacific Union would go on. Hardly miss a beat. May go on better.
Maybe you should split and start your own church, and I'll join.
Well, of course, you have to realize this is part of the bigger political scene here. If California, you know, it is the 6th largest economy in the world, the state of California.
Incredible.
You know, so why not start a new country here and let the other crazies everywhere?
You can have a chat to your friend Ben Carson and see if he's got any influence on that.
Well, Ben,
I think we'd better leave that one.
yeah, I better.
Yeah. That's fine.
I'll zip my lips.
That was more of a joke.
I'll zip up my lips now.
So one last thing I'm wanting you to do, like when the vote, just to comment on, when the vote came out in I think 2015 at the GC, and it kind of went not so well for women's ordination, and many people were hurt and felt devastated by that vote. I myself, afterwards, I said to a friend of mine, I will not be a Seventh-day Adventist by my next birthday. Yeah. And so I left the church by my next birthday because I've got a little 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, and they were much younger then, of course. But I didn't want to bring them into an environment where they would possibly grow up and feel a sense of suppression. And also I had troubles with the 1844 and the investigative judgment. So I'm not encouraging people to leave, but for me it was a wonderful experience. But I very much, in a sense of a relief, but I very much enjoy my connections with my Adventist friends and family. And so I'm not encouraging anyone, of course, to leave, but you've got to become your own person and make your own decisions and follow your own path. And I think one of the things I've respected about you over the years is you've obviously got to be careful what you say, but you've also been able to say what's true to your conscience as well, as you have done today. So to finish on, I'm wondering if you can give some encouragement to women in the church, particularly younger women that may want to become ordained pastors. Is there hope for them in their lifetime? What kind of inspiration can you and wisdom?
In their lifetime, Peter, come to the Pacific Union. We've got dozens of ordained women pastors, dozens, and they continue to be ordained. And also in the Columbia Union, it's happening. You can't hold back the dawn.
Do you fear sanctions because of your
no.
document?
No. Those things. Yeah, listen.
We better leave that one.
I better leave it. Okay.
Okay.
I don't fear. But in terms of your reaction to that session vote, that troubled me so much. I only got peace by writing the book, Where Are We Headed? The book came directly out of that concern.
It's a very good book.
I felt it was not just disappointing, in many ways it was disgraceful. I thought saw it as political manipulation. Much more I could say, but I've gone on from there and disappointed, but my eyes are on Jesus. They're not on whoever. I still have good friends. They're interesting sidelight. Nathan Brown, good Aussie. You know Nathan?
Yeah, we've interviewed Nathan on the podcast.
He wrote a review of my book, which was published in the review paper I used to edit. As a result of that, the editor got taken to the woodshed, and Nathan was told, never write for us again.
Whoa.
Yeah, I heard that from Nathan himself. But
wow.
That is sad. But Nathan, when he told me, he laughed. And that's the best thing. Laugh at it because it's petty. It's crazy.
It is crazy.
Laugh at it. Yeah.
Well, I've watched a lot of your online YouTube clips and stuff, as I have from the Standish Brothers to you name it. I've devoured it in my lifetime because I'm just absolutely fascinated by Adventist history and politics and theology. And but the one that really stands out to me is one where you were speaking in Sydney for the One Project. Can you just finish by sharing us some of that love, some of that passion to lift us all up and give us a sense of hope and positivity?
Listen, the church is broken. The Adventist church is broken, but maybe it's not broken as much as other churches out there. Only the Lord knows. But we have a great Lord, and He's compassionate. And grace, man, grace is like a tide. It's like a fountain. You know, it overflows, and it's unstoppable. Here you've got this guy, Lance Cameron, lovely guy, okay. But this is part of the Adventist church, okay. This is what is happening around the world. You've got young people, you know, all around the world, especially in the developing world, who have been given opportunities, and they develop themselves and they become leaders. They become wonderful, wonderful men and women, leaders in society. So yeah, some of them become major leaders in society, leaders in the church. You know, it's a strange church. It's a mixture of so much that is not what it ought to be, even ugly. Times, you know, ugly Adventists are really ugly. You know what I mean by ugly? You know, mean spirit, really hateful. On the other hand, the most loving people I know are Seventh-day Adventists, okay? It's a church of great contrast, okay? But the Lord is here and working out. I think He's working not just among us, but He is working among us and doing wonderful things like Lance Cameron and Loma Linda, the men and women who give themselves, and the nurses, especially now at this time of this plague. So yeah, I'm proud to be a Seventh-day Adventist. I really am. At times I'm ashamed of it, but overall I'm proud to be a Seventh-day Adventist.
Well, I think that's the perfect few sentences to bring our wonderful discussion to a close. I can't say how much we appreciate you giving of your time, and thank you, Nolene, there too. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure this will trigger a lot of people to have conversations on the Facebook wall where we've gone live today. And
Okay.
if you wanted to join into the fray, feel free to become a member of the group. I highly recommend, if people want to find out what you think and what your answers to pretty much most of your questions that they might have about you can be found by looking you up on YouTube and by buying your books.
Yeah, I have a bunch of them, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
The last several books I've written without any return. Okay, and I don't need the money, and that just sort of frees me up.
Mm,
I'm not writing to please the publisher,
yeah.
just writing to give my own thoughts.
Yeah. Look, we wish you well. I know about the health issue. I didn't want to raise it at all today in case it was something you didn't want to talk about, but we're all thinking of you, and we really hope that you, you know, are not being put under too much stress, pressure, anxiety, etc. during the treatment,
You
etc.
know, it's really the old saying, one day at a time. It's
Exactly.
really not about that.
Live in the moment.
For the last few weeks, one day at a time has just been terrific. For some reason, I have more strength, and I'm just feeling so much better.
Yeah.
And we're walking every day, and we're enjoying life. You know, Nolene has been just, and still is just, a wonderful companion.
We'll say farewell for now. Really appreciate your contribution. Until next time, we will see you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.